So hey guys, today we are going to talk about the DnD 5e class tier list in terms of their combat ability. So a couple of rules. First of all, there is no multi-classing in this ranking. It's just going to be monoclass. So there's going to be another tier list for the multi-class capabilities. And second of all, we are going to take in consideration the subclasses. I wasn't going to include any subclass variations, but upon further inspection, I just thought, well, it's just hard to omit the subclass in consideration with the overall class ability. But it's not going to be the case where the Hexblade Warlock brings the entire class to S tier. It is just going to upscale it a little bit as an average. So with that said, let's begin. We're going to start with the Artificer. And for the Artificer, I think it is going to be confidently in B tier. So why? Artificer is a very well balanced class in general. It gets medium armor and shield, and for armor, it gets heavy armor. It has decent defense with, as I mentioned, good AC and absorb elements. And the spell list is not too good, but also not too bad. You get stuff like Fairy Fire, you get Cure Wounds, and you get Web. These are great options, just not overall the strongest in the game. And considering how it is a half caster, it does get a slower scaling. As for the Artificer, it gets con save proficiency, which means better concentration saves. It gets some ability to support yourself and your friends. For example, Infusion buffing up DC, attacks, summons, and saving concentration saving throws. These are all solid options. And of course, it gets Flash of Genius, one of the highlights abilities in game. So I think it is a great option to help your friends survive devastating control spells. So overall, I'm going to put the Artificer in the middle, which is a great way to establish the middle line for our upcoming rankings. And by the way, I am mostly going to talk about classes that are below level 10. I think this is the most common level where camping ends. So let's continue. We're going to move on to the Barbarian, and for the Barbarian is going to go to A tier. So I'm sure that the martial caster disparity puts a lot of bad framing on the Barbarian, and here I want to just establish a couple things why I think it is so effective in combat. Number one, it does not need a crazy multi-attribute dependent ability score. Pretty much you just have to wear medium armor and have good strength, and that is all you need. As for the Barbarian, it is a very effective class in terms of surviving as a tank and dealing out damage as a striker. So for example, getting into rage, you are able to have resistance against physical damages, you get bonus in attack, and you can survive pretty much all the way to the end of the battle. And I've seen a Berserker Barbarian, I've seen a Totem Warrior Barbarian in practice. Especially for the Totem Warrior, it is just a absolute menace. Being able to survive basically everything by halving damages. And the Barbarian is such a solid option for damage. So I'm putting the Barbarian comfortably at A tier. And it does have the ability to mitigate some of the problems in DnD, since melee is pretty much worse than range most of the time. But the Barbarian, for example, Giant subclass allows you to throw your weapon and get it back. And you are also able to improve your movement speed with fast movement. So I think the Barbarian is just a very well put class overall. Of course, you also get 1d12 HP per level, which is going to be significant as you level up. So next up is going to be the Bard, and I am pretty sure people will be upset where I put the Bard, which is going to be behind Artificer in B tier. So this is again strictly talking about combat, and the Bard has a significant weakness. To me, the Bard is the quintessential glass cannon in DnD 5e. You get some of the most devastating control spells in game like Hypnotic Pattern. You get means to buff up your saving DC. For example, the Eloquence Bard being able to debuff enemy saving throws with their bardic inspirations. Of course, you are also a solid support with healing word, with aid, and as well as your bardic inspiration using as intended. But the main problem for a bard is that it has such a atrocious HP and defense. So 1d8 is average, but you get light armor proficiency only. So unless you're going for moderately armor, it's going to be a problem. And you don't have any solid defense spells to justify having such a bad defense. You don't get absorb elements, you don't get shield, you don't even get mirror image. So the bard, while being very powerful at what it does, it do have to stay in the back line, or a couple of powerful damages striking the bard is going to break its concentration. And again, I'm not discrediting how good the bard is. It is just that in combat, I find the other options above to be a lot more effective in more scenarios. So moving on to the cleric. So cleric is going to go to straight top of S tier, no contest. I was hesitant how good a cleric is going to be. I thought like, okay, Spirit Guardian is the only standout and it is already enough to put a high tier. But upon further inspection, this class is just unbalanced. So I'm going to start with the stuff it gets. At starting level, you get medium armor and shield, and some of the subclass gives you heavy armor, giving you some of the best AC as a full caster, which is insane. And you get high wisdom, which is the most important mental stats in game. I would say even more than constitution sometimes, because control spells are mostly wisdom DC. And for the cleric, your spell list is actually fantastic. You get bless, which is basically a kind of a niche comparison to aura of protection, but you get better range and better attack rolls. You get stuff like Spirit Guardians, which is solid damage options. You even get good control spells like Banishment, and in some cases Whole Person. I find the level 5 spell Dawn to be really underrated as well. Sunlight and being able to move as a bonus action with a 30 radius damage area. And the cleric is not just good at doing damages, it has aura of vitality, it has aid, it has healing word. The spell list is just fantastic to make yourself powerful, to make your allies powerful, to stay alive in game. And not to mention some of the most broken subclasses in the game. Twilight is just completely unbalanced. Having the ability to get 300 meters dark vision is just the weakest ability it has. You also get advantage in your initiative. You get to fly in certain areas. You get to use a ability, a channel divinity that just completely avoid your allies from dying and ending certain conditions. This is just one of the best subclass, if not the best subclass in game. And cleric itself is absolutely S tier. So we're moving on to the druid. And for the druid, I also rank it extremely high, going to S tier again. So the druid is pretty much a cleric with a decent variation. Where the cleric goes for support and some damages, druid go for area control and summons. And druid at first wasn't that impressive to me. I thought wild shape is kind of meh. But then I realized what it actually has. So for instance, conjure animal is such a signature spell for the druid, and I underestimated just how effective it is in combat, especially when you use it with the shepherd druid, being able to dish out insane damages and having a lot of bodies to tank damages. And the druid actually has one of the best spell lists in the game in my opinion, although there's a lot of concentration, which is, to be honest, not that much of a problem overall. For example, having Fairy Fire, Healing Word, Fog Cloud, having Entangle at level 1, absorb elements as well to buff up your defense. At level 2 and above, you get Moonbeam, you get Whole Person again, and you get Conjure Animals, you get Sleet Storm, you get Conjure Woodland Beings, which is, in my opinion, the best level 4 spell in the game if used correctly, or with some DM discretion. And not to mention some of the subclasses are just absolutely broken. Moon Druid at lower level is just a better martial with the equivalent HP and superior spell casting. You get again Shepherd Druid with the best summons. You get Stars Druid, the best balanced player in the game and versatile option as well. And the druid, of course, have high wisdom and medium armor and shield. I don't really see the only wearing wood armor parts to be anything more than flavor, so it has decent AC at least. I think the druid is just one of the best class in game. Wild shape, even if just used as utility, can be used in combat to get flight or burrow, some of the best abilities there is. So druid goes behind the cleric, but it is one of the strongest in game. So next up, we are looking at the fighter, and I'm not sure actually whether you'll be surprised or not, but I'm putting in S tier again. 3 S tiers. So what happened to the fighter? Fighter is pretty simple, to be honest. It just do good damages, but the damage it deals and the way it deals damage is such a defining characteristic that it deserves to be here. First of all, you are the class who gets the most ability score improvements and the quintessential amounts of extra attack even before level 11. 2 extra attacks, action charge to double your action economy for 1 turn, and to be able to use some of the best subclass in the game like Battle Master, buffing up your precision, buffing up your control options in the game. And this is just part of what makes the fighter good. The other part is that it gets the archery fighting style, and you can use crossbow expert and sharpshooter even below level 10. And these two combined together absolutely dominate most battles. You are effective when you are in melee range, you are effective when you are in huge range apart, like hundreds of feet away. And the fighter itself is just a really solid option to maneuver around, to do anything as long as it's related to damage. And not to mention some of the more broken subclass aside from Battlemaster, Echo Knight is really, really powerful. And the fighter itself is, to my opinion, the best martial in game, no contest. And I think the Barbarian is actually good enough to be in competition, but fighter just puts everyone behind as you slowly level up, and it stays effective at level 1. I have seen people use heavy armor as a range archer by putting 15 in strength and 16 plus in dexterity. You can totally go for that to maximize your combat options. But overall, fighter goes here. And next up, we are going for the monk. And for the monk, it is going straight to D tier. And I was hoping that the monk can rank higher actually. I think the monk is actually quite a solid class in combat. It gets the ability to use Stunning Strike, which is a powerful condition, but it does rely on a con save, so it's not very reliable. It gets its resource back on a short rest, but as you level up, you will be less resource intensive. But for the first few level, this is just terrible to use key. And Monk itself doesn't have a great AC option, unlike the Barbarian who has medium armor. Monk really has to get good dexterity and wisdom, and some of the other abilities are more about movements than damage and evading damages. And movement in particular is just not that valuable in this game. Monk is again not a bad class. For subclass, it does get some of the better options like the open hand monk, but overall it has to go here comparing to the higher options. And next up, we're going for the paladin. And for the paladin, no surprise, it's going to be quite high in the tier list, but it's going to A tier. Yep. So for the A tier paladin, I actually is still quite surprised it goes this high, because to me melee is just not a very good damage source in this game. But paladin has a couple things going for it. First of all, you get a decent to good spell list. Bless, Fine Steed, etc. is quite a solid option. And Divine Smite is actually such a clutch save, especially when you're aiming for critical hits, doing a huge amount of Nova damage. And while it is resource intensive, it is often enough to do the job. But aside from having heavy armor, having some fighting styles, having Channel Divinity, having some of the best subclass in game like Vengeance, the best trait, as everyone knows about a paladin, is aura of protection. It is still a little bit overrated since it has such a small range, 10 feet, at lower levels, but the ability to buff up your saves and your ally saves per your charisma modifier permanently is so insane that it has to go here. So Next up, we are moving on to the Ranger. And Ranger, I was going to rank it higher, but upon comparison, it has to go to C tier. So Ranger is a solid class. It gets archery, it gets some great damage options, especially for the Gloomstalker. But there is a problem which everyone mentioned already, but it's really generally not worth it to go past level 5 after you get extra attack. And since you are doing a mono class tier list, Ranger really suffer from this. Basically, they don't have a lot of options beyond just getting better movements, bypassing difficult terrain, some options for hiding, but it never really gets much of a damage boost. And Ranger itself is again not a bad class, but when you look at all the options above, you can see why Ranger is here. So we are moving on to the Rogue, and Rogue is my first class in the game, and Rogue goes to the bottom tier. And Rogue is just not that well designed in my opinion. The Rogue is again quite good in terms of utility, but Skill Monkey is really not something to be proud of. In combat, the Rogue has sneak attack. So first of all, you don't get extra attack, which is a superior option in my opinion. But even for sneak attack, you have to meet certain conditions, like get the advantage by maybe standing still, or you have an ally in sight next to your enemy. And when you are comparing situations on a vacuum, I find the Rogue to more often than not miss its chance to use sneak attack, and half of the time it just deal really average or below average numbers. And for the subclasses, it is fine. I think Arcane Trickster is good. I think the Phantom Rogue is good. I think the Swashbuckler is good. But overall, the Rogue, especially with just light armor and not that many in combat advantages, you can say that it does reduce some huge damage incoming with Uncanny Dodge. But again, it's a reaction, so it's just once per turn. And overall, I will put it below Monk to be the worst in game, which is a shame. I love the class, honestly. And we are moving on to the Sorcerer, and the Sorcerer is going to reach quite high in this tier list. It's going to A tier. So Sorcerer in combat is a beast. There is a couple of things. Number one, meta magic. I believe it can still be better, but as it is now, meta magic is fantastic. Being able to subtle cast your spells or subtle counterspell means that your spell is always going to activate. Having Quicken means that you can double spells like Sunbeam to double your DPS per round for the first round. Having Twinned Meta Magic means that you can double your control to be really effective in combat. And the Sorcerer does have Con Save, which means better protection. And one of its weakness really is that it has a low HP. It has a pretty bad spells known numbers, and the sorcerer itself is not as versatile in terms of spell selection, even though it is comparable to the wizard. And some of these are mitigated by the new subclasses, like Clockwork Soul is perfect for this. Clockwork Soul gets more spells known, more spell options, and it gets some pool of defense to buff its temporary HP. So Sorcerer, for this reason, bumps up to at least A tier. But I do think Paladin and above are better combatants in a average game, especially since Sorcerer is so resource intensive and doesn't really get much back on the short rest. So for the Warlock, now Warlock is going to be the most controversial pick in this category. And I just want to say we are not considering multiclass, and we are considering tier 2 as the end. So for this, I'm going to put the Warlock in top of C tier. Yes, so I'm going to start by saying since we're considering mostly level 10 or below, the Warlock is going to suffer a little bit. Its scaling is really bad. The spell slot it gets at level 8 is 2. So 2 spell slot per short rest is terrible. And Eldritch Blast is again a solid attack option for sure, but the fighter is going to be better as for other weapon dealers, because weapon gets more damage bonuses than Warlock gets for Eldritch Blast. But it is a pretty solid way to deal damages. The invocations are fine. I found most of them to be quite underwhelming, but it is fitting for certain builds to be more powerful. But I don't believe the Warlock can go any higher. I do agree that the Hexblade solves a lot of its problems, like getting better armor proficiency, getting some damage buffs, but overall it just doesn't reach the point where the Warlock as a whole is good enough to be above, like the Bard, for example, especially when it is considering tier 2 or below. So lastly, we are talking about the Wizard, and it is kind of a reverse. I thought the Wizard is going to be quite low until I realized, hey, the Wizard is still so powerful, even just at tier 2. So it's going to go S tier again. So Wizard is good for a couple of reasons. Number one, arcane recovery means that you get more spell casting per day. This is a really practical way to improve your ability in game and in combat to have more spell slots. And for a wizard, you may say, oh, ritual spells is mostly for non-combat use, but find familiar and to some extent Phantom Steed, Leomund's Tiny Hut, and even Tensor's Floating Disc is going to be very powerful using in combat. For movement increase, for action economy buff, for protection, and for movement utility. So the wizard is already good with rituals, but the spell list is just that good. Wall of Force at level 5 beats everything in game because of how good it is as a control spell, coupling with all the other classes. The wizard also has some of the best option that is exclusive to them. I would say that like Tasha's Hideous Laughter is only shared by the Bard, and for level 2 and above, having Vortex Warp and Misty Step shared by the Sorcerer and Warlock. Level 3, it gets Counterspell, Fireball, Hypnotic Pattern. Level 4, it gets Banishment, Polymorph, Dimension Door, even Wall of Fire, Secondary Radiance, and all these combined together, and also greater summon greater demon is one of the best spells in the game in my opinion. I'm gonna expand on this later. But basically the wizard is great because its spell is just that good, and it has more abilities to cast spells than the other class in general. Not to mention the wizard is actually not that bad in defense for the same reason as a sorcerer. The HP is really bad with 1d6, but you do get absorb elements, you do get shield, you do get mirror image. These are the standard defense options in game. So Wizard overall deserves to at least be S tier and to hang with the big ones. So this is the tier list for today for the standard classes. I would like to hear what you think and let me know in the comments. See you next time.